when I first went and met Bradley, and I'd never known Bradley before working with him. And I lay that all on Bradley. It's really a film for the time. It's a first time venture for him as a director, and he was just brilliant, as it turns out, as a director.
Imagine a man sitting completely alone on a quiet ranch in Malibu, surrounded by nothing but open land, horses, and silence. The cameras are gone. The Hollywood lights, long faded. And that golden voice, the one that made millions of people stop whatever they were doing and just listen, is now barely a whisper carried by the California wind. He is 81 years old. And for the first time in his life, he isn't performing strength for anyone. But just a few months before this moment, he had stood in a room full of Hollywood's most powerful people. And he said something that made every single person go completely quiet. Not because it was impressive. Not because it was planned. Because it was the most honest thing anyone in that room had heard in years. And no one was ready for it. See, the world thought they knew Sam Elliott. The slow drawl. The thick mustache. The kind of face that made you trust someone the instant you saw it. For decades, he was Hollywood's definition of what a real man looked like on screen. But behind that image, behind every cowboy role, every gruff performance, every perfectly crafted moment of on-screen strength, was a man living a life far more complicated, far more painful, and far more human than anything he was ever paid to portray. And the truth took 81 years to finally come out. If you grew up watching films or television, Sam Elliott's voice probably lives somewhere deep in your memory. You might not even remember exactly where you heard it. But you remember how it made you feel. Steady. Safe. Real. He was born on August 9, 1944, in Sacramento, California. His father was a hard man. Quiet. Demanding. The kind of man who showed love through discipline and never once said the words out loud. Sam grew up absorbing one lesson above everything else, that real men keep it inside. That strength means silence. That you never let anyone see you struggle. He carried that lesson with him his entire life. And it shaped everything. His family moved to Oregon, and eventually to Los Angeles, where a young Sam Elliott walked into one of the most ruthless industries on the planet, with almost nothing in his pocket and everything to prove. But what happened next was not the fairy tale anyone would write. He struggled. For years. He worked jobs that had nothing to do with acting. He took small parts that barely paid. He walked into auditions and was told, over and over again, that he didn't fit. Too rough around the edges. Too old-fashioned. Not the look Hollywood was chasing in that moment. Most people would have quit. Most people would have looked at those years of silence and rejection and decided, this wasn't meant for me. But Sam Elliott wasn't built that way. And slowly, painfully slowly, something began to shift. The 1970s gave him room to breathe. Small roles became bigger ones. That voice started doing what no director could manufacture. Films like Mask, Tombstone, and Roadhouse didn't just make him famous. They made him feel like something that couldn't be replaced. He became the gold standard of a certain kind of American man. Unshakable. Dependable. The kind of presence that makes everyone around him stand a little straighter. And then, there was Catherine Ross. They met on a film set in 1978. Married in 1984. And what followed was something so rare in Hollywood that people who knew them barely spoke about it out loud, as if talking too much about it might somehow break the spell. No public fights. No cheating headlines. No dramatic separations. Just two people who chose each other, every single day, for 40 years. From the outside, Sam Elliott's life looked like everything a person could ever want. But something was building underneath all of it. Something quiet. Something heavy. Something that no one around him fully understood, because Sam had spent a lifetime making sure no one ever would. Here's the thing about men who are known for being the strong one. Nobody checks on them. Sam Elliott had spent his entire career playing men who didn't need saving. Men who walked into danger and came out the other side without a scratch. Men who never asked for help and never showed pain, because that was the whole point of them. And somewhere in those decades of performing that version of a man, he stopped being able to separate it from himself. The rejection of his early years had done something to him that success never fully undid. Even at the peak of his career, even when the awards were coming and the roles were bigger than ever, there was a voice in the back of his mind that whispered he was still one bad decision away from losing it all. That kind of fear doesn't disappear when the applause gets louder. It gets better at hiding. And as the years passed, Hollywood itself began to change around him. The rugged, old-school American man that Sam Elliott had spent decades embodying, was slowly being pushed to the side. Newer faces. Different stories. A different definition of what audiences wanted to see. For a man whose entire identity was tied to that image, that shift landed harder than people realized. He didn't talk about it. Of course he didn't. That wasn't the kind of man he had been taught to be. But something was coming. Something that would crack the surface of everything Sam Elliott had carefully built, and force the world to look at the man underneath. No one saw it coming. Not even him. In 2018, something beautiful happened. A Star is Born, Bradley Cooper's raw, emotional film, gave Sam Elliott a role unlike anything he had played before. And at 74 years old, after 5 decades of grinding through this industry, he received his first Academy Award nomination. 74 years old. First nomination. Let that sit for a moment. The industry celebrated him. He was on late-night shows. Magazine covers. Standing ovations in rooms where standing ovations mean something. And Sam Elliott stood in the middle of all of it, smiling that slow, steady smile the world had come to love. But behind it, something complicated was happening. Because when you spend decades being told you're good but not quite great enough, and then suddenly the industry turns around and says we were wrong about you all along, it doesn't just feel like victory. It feels like grief. Grief for the years. For the roles that went to other people. For the version of yourself that kept going through all of it without anyone noticing how much it cost. And Sam Elliott sat with that feeling quietly. Like he sat with everything. Then came 2022. And that's when everything started to fall apart. At a live podcast recording, Sam Elliott said something about the acclaimed film The Power of the Dog that sent an immediate shockwave through the entertainment world. His words were blunt. Unfiltered. And the reaction was swift and brutal. The same Hollywood that had just placed a crown on his head, turned on him almost overnight. The headlines were vicious. Social media ran with it for days. And Sam Elliott, the man who had spent 80 years being a symbol of quiet dignity, was suddenly standing in the middle of a firestorm, with nowhere to hide. But here's what most people didn't understand about that moment. What he said wasn't just about a film. It was a window into everything he had never allowed himself to say out loud before. The fear. The confusion. The feeling of a world changing faster than he could keep up with. The pressure of being a symbol for something, and not knowing what to do when that something starts to feel like a cage. And the truth behind all of it, was far more heartbreaking than anyone expected. When the storm finally settled, Sam Elliott did something that almost no Hollywood star of his generation has ever done. He didn't deflect. He didn't disappear. He didn't let his publicist handle it with a carefully worded statement designed to say everything while meaning nothing. He apologized. A real one. The kind that costs something. He spoke directly to the people he had hurt. He sat in the discomfort of being publicly wrong. And he said, clearly, without excuses, that he had let his own biases speak louder than his values. For a man who had spent 80 years never letting anyone see him crack. This was seismic. And it changed the way people looked at him. Because now they weren't seeing Sam Elliott the icon, the legend, the symbol. They were seeing a man. Complicated. Flawed. Trying to understand a world that had moved on without asking his permission. Trying to hold on to who he was while slowly realizing that who he was had always been more than the image he performed. His daughter Cleo had spent years maintaining a quiet, private life away from the spotlight. Their relationship, something Sam rarely spoke about, suddenly felt like it carried weight that hadn't been fully examined. What does it do to a child, to grow up in the shadow of a man who was everyone's idea of strength, but maybe not always available to just be a father? These are the questions that started surfacing. Quietly. Painfully. Sam Elliott had built walls so high and so strong that even the people who loved him most could only see the top of them. And for the first time in his life, those walls were coming down in public. Not on a film set. Not through a scripted performance. But in real time, in full view of the world that had always watched him from a distance. His fans, the ones who had grown up with him, who had trusted him, who had found something in his voice that felt like home, they didn't turn away. They moved closer. What the 2022 controversy cracked open was something Hollywood rarely makes room to discuss. Men of Sam Elliott's generation were never taught a language for their interior life. They were handed a script from birth: stay quiet, stay hard, stay forward, and they followed it because no one ever offered them another option. Sam had followed that script for 81 years. And the cracks that appeared in 2022 were not the signs of a man breaking down. They were the signs of a man finally, letting himself be seen as something other than indestructible. Some in the industry accepted that. Some respected the apology and moved on. But others had already made their decision, that one controversial moment was enough to define 50 years of work. That's the cold arithmetic of modern celebrity. It doesn't care about context. It doesn't care about decades. It only cares about the last thing you did. But something quieter was happening at the same time. Letters were arriving at his ranch. Emails. Messages from people who had never